favorites on the menu. I think one of the most difficult things about a plant-based diet and veganism in general is butter. I think there's a plant-based version of just about everything, but to get a really well laminated croissant, it almost seems impossible. But they nailed it. I've been living in New York since March, and I love it. I feel like I run into people all the time. Actually, just now, I ran into somebody who I knew from high school walking on the sidewalk. So last time I checked in, I was going to India, and I spent 3 months there studying vegan culinary. So right when I got back, I moved here, and I've been studying with my mouth ever since. Extremely busy. I think a lot of people go to grab a latte and a pastry on a walk. It seems very popular on the weekends.
Yeah, I'm very partial to our chocolate croissant, and then sometimes we don't get it very often, but the chocolate on the croissant is literally savory Danish.
Yum.
Put in it.
Oh my god. It's so crispy! I got a chocolate palmier. Super good.
Amazing. Are you guys vegan?
No.
No.
I was like, am I?
How is it?
Good. And a fruit bite.
Good?
Yeah, it's really good.
And what is this? I saw you dipping this in your coffee.
This is a day-old scone. I think it has rhubarb in it, or strawberry.
Oh my gosh.
But I like the day-olds because they're literally only $1, and I can't really taste the difference.
Is that was in that basket? I think
Yeah.
I saw that. Here's the last pastry of the bunch. To try to make it myself.
On the weekends, we definitely have a ton more. It's just a smaller selection during the week. But yeah, and then what we have daily is an assortment, the same like type of pastries daily. It's just the flavors are going to change depending on season. Our croissants are great. I'm sure, as you know, like a vegan croissant is hard to come by.
Unbelievable. And extremely hard to make, I think.
Yes. So we have the plain, we have chocolate, and then we actually have almond whiskey, which is really great.
Oh my gosh.
Almond whiskey is like, it's kind of a stronger flavor profile, but people love it. Back are the cinnamon rolls. Cinnamon rolls are great, kind of just OG. Looks like we have apple turnovers, monkey bread, and then the classic Danishes that we have.
Pastry is which one? This almond
this
one?
one, the almond croissant.
What's so good about it?
We bake them and put like the almond filling in
Oh
them.
my gosh. Game
Let's see if I can do some latte
Latte
art.
art, that'd be amazing.
I'm actually like pretty shitty at it, so we're gonna try.
I spent like a whole year of my life trying to make,
That was kind of bad.
It's a heart.
but it's a peach.
Dun, 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 dun. It is now breaching 9:30 in the evening, and I'm going to try to tackle a vegan croissant. The recipe, was originally going to be adapted from somebody else's, but at this point, I think it's really gonna take a turn, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, because I'm lacking a lot of ingredients that typically go into a classic vegan croissant, if you can even call anything that, a classic vegan something, if it's classically not vegan. So let's begin. I still have pretty high hopes because I think with the right lamination technique, which is the folding of the butter, which is probably the most important thing here, it could work. I'm just worried about the lack of gluten in my flour because I'm using gluten-free flour. So really there's not even a lack of it, there's just none at all. I made a little mise en place, which is French for putting in place, which I learned in culinary school. So it's like doing a lot of tedious work before getting to the fun part, which is the actual baking. And I think that's why my brain is like, no, skip it. You don't need to do this. And then I realized that patience is a virtue, and baking really only works if you measure your ingredients. I tend to steer clear of baking because I think I get excited and I want to stray away from recipes, which sometimes does me proud when I'm making savory dishes. I think when it comes to cooking, you have a lot more room to add in things that you think sound good, and there's a high possibility that it will work out in your favor. That has never worked for me when it comes to baked goods, so I just don't make them, and I think that's a bad way to handle business. Just because my approach doesn't work doesn't mean that it's just bad in general. I know baking can be fun, I just am not doing it the right way yet. So, essentially, that is why I did this. We'll see how it goes. Step 1. Here I have lukewarm water. Here I have lukewarm water, and it's going into my mixing bowl. Issue number 2. The recipe calls for granulated sugar, and I only have powdered. But isn't powdered sugar just blended granulated sugar? I feel like it should work. So I'm going to add a pinch of this measured out portion into the warm water so the yeast has something to snack on. And now I'm going to take 4.5 teaspoons of yeast that I think is alive and put it into the water. Yes. Looking awesome. I'm wondering if I have some fun things to show you. Maybe while this eats, I'll sneak around my apartment. I got a new plant. Frank is doing well. Alright, it's been a little over 5 minutes. I'm gonna add the rest of this sugar. Softened vegan butter. And 3.5 cups of gluten-free flour. So I'm just gonna cover it and let it sit for about an hour while I dilly-dally, and we'll see what happens. It has officially been an hour. I'm getting a little tired, but I'm 50% there. And I really want this at least by the morning. So it's doubled in size. It also smells very yeasty, which is a good sign. I think it all really comes down to this lamination process, which I think is the true marker of what makes a croissant so difficult to make. If it doesn't have a lot of layers, it's not a croissant. It also has to be kind of flaky, almost like butterfly wing thinness. It just comes off. Those pastries that I had this morning like fell into a million pieces. I made the biggest mess and I wasn't even trying to. It's just so delicate on the top because the layers are so thin and buttery that they crisp up and get really golden in the oven, and the center is soft, like almost like it's made of a different dough. It's like I think it depends on the croissant you have, but you can have a very, very airy bread-like croissant that doesn't have a super wet interior, but the air pockets in it make it like you're eating a sponge or something. And then you can have something like the croissant I had this morning, which had like that cookie dough consistency, and it's delicious. It's so good. I want your number, no, I don't wanna know. How does it go? Da 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 da. I can't stop listening to this song. No, a scrub is a guy. Da da da. No, I don't want no scrub. A bakery just seems like impossible skill set. I just appreciate Cake Boss so much more making these guys. Like, those 3-tiered cakes must have been crazy. And I feel like Buddy, like, what happened to him? I used to love that show. And what a sweet Italian man. I don't come around them often when I'm watching TV. I'm trying to teach myself how to create a double turn. Not so bad. I didn't have to flour my counter. That's how oily this is. I'm not sure how that will go, but I'm gonna wrap this up, put it in the freezer, and check on it in another 30 minutes before we do fold number 2. No, I don't want no scrubs me sitting on the passenger side. Shoot. I don't have plastic wrap, I only have this bag, and it seems a little small. Unfortunately, it's looking like I dipped this dough into butter. I also think it needs to be a lot colder, so I'm going to freeze it for maybe an hour this time instead of 30 minutes and see if I can roll it out without getting butter everywhere. The day is new, and the gluten-free ball of dough that I had a little while ago is gone. Don't want to talk about what happened to it. All I can say is her performance wasn't what our company was expecting, and we had to terminate her. So we're gonna try again with new employees featuring bread flour that is full of gluten, a new and more stable vegan butter, and cane sugar. I try to stay away from buying white granulated. Just a preference, but I'm hoping this will work the same. I think the only difference is that the granules here are a little bit bigger, but I'm not sure. That's the only modification I'm making. The rest is going to be by the books, following the recipe to a T, because I think that's what would make this fair. I was talking to one of my coworkers. I was talking to one of the people that I work with who is an expert in baking, and she was telling me the science behind what makes a perfect pie crust, which I think can translate to a croissant pretty easily. And the key is the temperature of your butter when you're putting your baked good in the oven. With pie crusts, you are making these butter crumbs, right? You're taking pretty cold butter, putting it in some flour, adding in a bit of water, and making a crumble with your hands. And if your pieces are too small, your pie crust is going to be really, really short and stiff and crispy, because there isn't a lot of separation between the flaky flour bits and the butter that is going to cause those flaky flour bits to rise and separate from each other. So you get that really almost biscuit-like pie crust that's so, so good. My grandma has a great recipe, and I think she would say the same thing. You need really cold butter, and you don't want to break it up too much. With croissants, you're folding the butter over itself, and you're trying to keep a specific folding pattern continuously by putting it back in the fridge so it doesn't have room to melt and separate from the flour layer. So after a certain amount of folds, it'll be like butter flour, butter flour, butter flour. But if it's too warm, it will be like butter mess, butter mess. And what really makes a difference here is the temperature of your dough and your butter, which is why you keep wanting to put it back in the refrigerator. So when you get the butter flour layering right and you put it in the oven, what's really important is the temperature of your butter at that stage, in addition to all of the other folding stages, because if it's cold enough when it goes into the oven, the butter has time to almost separate from that flour layer and create steam. And that is what gives your croissant or pie crust or any really flaky pastry that separation between the buttery bits and the flour bits. It's what creates that lamination and that really fluffy texture. If it's too warm, it almost just melts together, kind of like a cookie would, and it crisps up all in the same layer. It just doesn't have that same satisfying separation and like wispiness that a croissant does. So I'm really going to try to be careful about my butter temperature, especially using vegan butter, because what I noticed the first time I tried to make these with the gluten-free flour was that my butter kept melting, and even when I was doing my folds right and chilling for the right amount of time, it didn't seem to be enough. Like the butter was far too soft to be able to fold and repeat multiple times. So I'm hoping this goes a lot better, I'm hoping this goes a lot better than the first time. Okay, the time is now. It is Friday, the end of the week, so this has almost been a 5-day process, but I'm feeling confident as these go into the oven. I think if things went wrong after this point, I would be really surprised and very disappointed. Which is really setting myself up for disappointment in general, I suppose. But I have a good feeling. I'm trusting my intuition. These are gonna go into a 425-degree oven with an egg wash on them. And I think that's to make that crispy outer shell And then they continue to bake at a lower temperature, around 350 for another 10 to 15, and that's probably to cook the rest of the croissant and get the middle nice and done. They kind of look like Pillsbury crescent rolls. I do think for all the work, you do end up with a nice flaky biscuit. It just doesn't compare. And I think this was a 24-hour process. There was a point while these were baking where all of the butter started to melt to the bottom of the pan, and I actually had to remove some of it, which is I think why the bottoms got so crispy. But I don't know, I think if you want a croissant, you really don't want a biscuit. And maybe I shouldn't have set my expectations so high. But it's just nowhere close. There's just something I so appreciate about a baker, about anybody who makes pastries. It's the hardest thing to do. It is really good. Maybe my layers were too thick. I don't know. Okay, I'll see you next time. I think I'm going to a restaurant down the street next week. And it's a pretty special one.
Le petit monstre.
Le Petit Monster.